The gunshot echoed through Dry Creek, Arizona Territory, 1868, as Amelia Turner watched her husband's body slump into the dirt of Main Street. 23 years old and now a widow, she clutched her trembling hands to her mouth as blood soaked into the parched earth. Miles Garrison had been many things: honest storekeeper, loving husband of barely a year, and now, another victim of the lawlessness that plagued the frontier. "I'll find who did this, Amelia," promised Marshall Gentry, his voice low and steady as he removed his hat. "And when I do, justice will be served." His weathered face, tanned from years under the merciless western sun, showed a determination that gave Amelia her only fragment of hope in that moment of despair. The following morning, Amelia dressed in black. Her fingers trembled as she buttoned the dark bodice, tears streaming down her face. She stared at her reflection, young, with auburn hair now severely pinned back, her green eyes hollow with grief. "I'll wear this until justice is done," she whispered to the empty room, a vow made in silence and pain. The killer was never found. Marshall rode out of Dry Creek 2 weeks later, leaving behind only a promise written on a torn piece of paper. "I won't rest until I find who did this. Wait for me." Amelia folded the note and tucked it into her Bible. Then she continued to wear black. Days turned to months, months to years. Dry Creek grew from a dusty outpost to a proper town with a schoolhouse, a church, and eventually a railroad stop. Through it all, Amelia Turner remained in her small house at the edge of town, running the general store her husband had left her, forever draped in mourning clothes. "Mrs. Turner needs to move on," townsfolk would whisper as she walked past. 10 years of mourning ain't natural. But Amelia paid them no mind. Her heart had hardened like the Arizona clay beneath her feet, and the black clothes became her armor against a world that had taken everything from her. In the summer of 1878, exactly 10 years after Miles's death, Amelia stood behind the counter of her store, recording inventory in her ledger. At 33, she remained striking despite the severity of her appearance, or perhaps because of it. Her auburn hair now showed threads of silver at the temples, but her posture remained straight, dignified. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see a stranger enter. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore trail-worn clothes and carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger. His face was partially hidden beneath the shadow of his hat, but she could see a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Good afternoon," Amelia replied with the practiced politeness she showed all customers. "Can I help you find something?" The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with gray and eyes the color of a storm-laden sky. A long scar ran from his temple to his jaw, and recognition slammed into Amelia with such force she had to grip the counter to steady herself. "Marshall," she whispered. "Hello, Amelia." Later that evening, a knock sounded at her door. Amelia stood frozen for a moment, knowing who waited on the other side. With trembling fingers, she smoothed her black dress and opened the door. Marshall Gentry stood there, hat in hand, the dying sunlight casting long shadows across his face. "I kept my promise," he said simply. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "You found who killed Miles?" Marshall nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "May I come in? It's a long story, and not one for the street." She stepped aside, allowing him entry into the home she had maintained in solitude for a decade. The parlor was neat and orderly, though sparsely furnished, a reflection of her life since Miles's death. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, falling back on the social niceties that had been her shield for years. "That would be fine," Marshall answered, remaining standing until Amelia gestured toward a chair. When she returned with 2 cups of coffee, Marshall was examining a daguerreotype on the mantel. Miles and Amelia on their wedding day, both smiling with the innocent happiness of those unaware of the brevity of their joy. "You haven't changed much," Marshall commented as she handed him a cup. "Everything has changed," Amelia replied softly, taking the seat across from him. "Now please, tell me what brought you back after all this time." Marshall set his cup down carefully. "I never stopped hunting, Amelia. The trail led me all across the territory, then into New Mexico, Colorado, even up to Wyoming. The man who shot Miles was a hired gun named Carter Dowd." "Hired? Someone paid to have Miles killed?" Disbelief colored Amelia's voice. Marshall nodded grimly. Your husband wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was targeted because he refused to sell his store to a man named Jebediah Hurst. Hurst? I remember him. He wanted to buy up all the businesses on Main Street back then. He left town shortly after. She stopped, realization dawning. After Miles was killed. Yes, Hurst hired Dowd to eliminate the obstacle. When I left Dry Creek, I was following Dowd's trail. It took years, but I finally caught up with him in a saloon in Santa Fe 3 months ago. And Amelia leaned forward, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. He confessed before he died, gave up Hurst's name and all the details. Before he died, Amelia's voice was barely audible. Marshall's eyes hardened. He drew on me. I was faster. Silence stretched between them as Amelia processed his words. And Hurst, serving 20 years in Yuma Territorial Prison. I brought him in 2 weeks ago. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes for the first time in years. A decade of frozen grief began to crack, like ice breaking up on a river after a long winter. 10 years, she whispered. 10 years I've waited for this day. I'm sorry it took so long, Marshall said, his voice rough with emotion. I made you a promise, and I couldn't come back until I'd kept it. Why? Amelia asked suddenly. Why devote 10 years of your life to a promise made to a woman you barely knew? Marshall was quiet for a long moment. Because I saw something in you that day, a strength few possess. And because... He hesitated. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you waiting forever for justice that never came. The next morning, Amelia stood before her wardrobe, staring at the rows of black dresses that had defined her existence for a decade. With trembling hands, she reached past them to the back of the closet, pulling out a dress she had almost forgotten, a simple blue calico she had sewn just before Miles died. When she emerged from her house that day, the townsfolk of Dry Creek stopped and stared. Amelia Turner was wearing blue, and there was color in her cheeks for the first time in 10 years. She walked directly to the hotel where Marshall was staying. He was just coming down the stairs when she entered the lobby. Amelia, he said, surprise evident in his voice as he took in her appearance. Justice has been served, she said simply. I can finally lay my grief to rest. She took a deep breath. Thank you, Marshall. I'm glad, he replied, a small smile touching his lips. You look like yourself again. I'm not sure who that is anymore, she admitted, but I'm ready to find out. She paused, gathering her courage. How long will you be staying in Dry Creek? Marshall studied her face. I hadn't decided. My job is done, but... Stay, she said quietly. At least for a while. Spring blossomed in the desert, painting the landscape with wildflowers in defiance of the harsh terrain. Amelia and Marshall fell into a cautious routine. He would come to the store in the afternoons, helping with deliveries or repairs, and they would often share supper afterward, talking late into the evening. Tell me about your travels, Amelia asked one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. Marshall leaned back in his chair. I've seen a lot of this country. The Rockies in Colorado will take your breath away, peaks so high they seem to scrape the sky itself. The plains of Kansas stretch so far you'd think the earth goes on forever. I've crossed rivers wide as lakes and deserts where you could die of thirst with water just beneath your feet. It sounds beautiful and dangerous, Amelia commented. Like most worthwhile things, Marshall agreed, his eyes finding hers in the fading light. A comfortable silence settled between them before Marshall spoke again. I never told you how I got this scar, he said, running his finger along the mark on his face. I assumed it was from your work. In a way, it happened the first year I was tracking Dowd. I caught up with him in Tucson, but I wasn't careful enough. He got the drop on me, slashed my face with his knife, and left me for dead. Amelia gasped softly. How did you survive? An Apache medicine woman found me. Her people were camped nearby, and she convinced the others to help rather than finish me off. His voice grew soft with memory. She didn't speak English, and I knew about 10 words of Apache, but she saved my life. The scar could have been much worse, Amelia observed. Marshall nodded. She was skilled. Taught me some of her healing ways during the weeks I recovered. Said the scar was a gift, it would remind me to be humble before my enemies. Wise woman, Amelia said with a small smile. Yes. Marshall turned to face her fully. Amelia, I've been thinking. I've spent 10 years chasing ghosts across the frontier. Now that it's done, I find myself wondering what comes next. Her heart quickened. What do you want, Marshall? Peace, he said simply. A place to belong. Maybe. He hesitated. Maybe someone to belong with. Amelia reached out, her fingers lightly touching the scar on his face. We've both been marked by the past, she whispered. Perhaps it's time we stopped letting it define our future. Marshall covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a gentle kiss to her palm. The simple gesture sent warmth spreading through Amelia's body, awakening feelings she had thought long dead. I'd like to court you properly, Amelia Turner, Marshall said, his voice rough with emotion. If you'll allow it. Amelia felt tears sting her eyes. But these were different from the tears of grief she had shed for so long. These were tears of possibility, of hope. I think I'd like that very much. Summer brought scorching heat to Dry Creek, but also new beginnings. Marshall took a job as deputy to the town's current sheriff, his experience and reputation earning him immediate respect. Amelia began to redesign the general store, expanding its offerings and creating a more welcoming space. Together, they ventured beyond the boundaries they had each established for themselves. Marshall taught Amelia to ride a horse properly, not side saddle as she had been taught as a girl, but astride, feeling the power and freedom of controlling her own mount. In return, Amelia introduced Marshall to the simple pleasures he had denied himself during his years of pursuit: home-cooked meals shared with laughter, music from the piano she had neglected for a decade, and the companionship of someone who understood the weight of carrying burdens alone. One hot August afternoon, Marshall took Amelia on a picnic to a hidden spring in the foothills outside town. The water bubbled up from underground, creating a small oasis of green amid the tawny landscape. How did you find this place? Amelia asked, marveling at the cottonwood trees providing blessed shade. Sheriff Jenkins told me about it, Marshall replied, spreading a blanket beneath the largest tree. Said it was the best-kept secret in the county. They ate the lunch Amelia had prepared: cold chicken, biscuits, and apple pie, talking easily about the town's happenings and plans for the store. When they finished, Marshall suggested a walk. There's something I want to show you, he said, offering his hand. He led her up a narrow path to a ridge overlooking the valley where Dry Creek nestled among the hills. It's beautiful, Amelia breathed, taking in the panoramic view. I come here to think, Marshall admitted. About the past, the future. About you. Amelia turned to him, her heart pounding. The months since his return had healed something in both of them, creating a bond forged from shared understanding and growing affection. What do you think about me? She asked softly. Marshall's eyes held hers. I think about how brave you are. How strong. I think about your smile, the real one that reaches your eyes, not the polite one you give customers. He took a step closer. I think about how much I want to be the man who brings that real smile to your face every day. Marshall, she whispered. I've faced down gunfighters and outlaws, he continued, tracked men across deserts and mountains. But standing here with you scares me more than any of that. Why? She asked, though she knew the answer in her heart. Because I love you, Amelia. And that makes me vulnerable in a way I haven't been for a very long time. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his scar with gentle fingers. Love isn't a weakness, Marshall. It's the greatest strength we have. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a very long journey. His lips were gentle yet insistent, his arms strong around her waist. Amelia melted into him, all the frozen parts of her heart thawing in the heat of their embrace. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures and decisions to be made. Marshall and Amelia's courtship had become the talk of Dry Creek, with most people expressing approval and a few old-timers remarking that it was about time Mrs. Turner found herself some happiness. On a crisp October evening, Marshall escorted Amelia to the town's harvest dance. She wore a dress of deep burgundy, not black, never black again, and had arranged her hair in soft curls rather than the severe style she had adopted during her years of mourning. You look beautiful, Marshall told her as they entered the decorated town hall. Amelia smiled, still not entirely comfortable with compliments after so long. Thank you. You're quite handsome yourself. Indeed. Marshall had traded his usual practical attire for a proper suit. Though he still wore his gun belt, old habits died hard for a man who had lived by his reflexes for so long. The music was lively, the atmosphere festive. Amelia found herself laughing more than she had in years as Marshall swung her around the dance floor. When they stepped outside for air, he led her to a quiet corner of the porch. "I've been thinking," he said, taking her hands in his. "About the future." Amelia felt a flutter of nervousness. "What about it?" "I'm not getting any younger, Amelia. I've lived a hard life, seen things no man should see. Done things, too." He took a deep breath. "But these past months with you have given me something I never thought I'd have: peace. Happiness." "You've given me the same," she assured him. "The thing is," he continued, "I can't imagine going back to the life I had before. And I don't want to." To Amelia's surprise, Marshall lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Amelia Turner, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I know I'm not the man Miles was." "Don't," she interrupted gently. "Don't compare yourself to him. Miles was my past. You're my present. And, I hope, my future." Marshall's eyes shone in the lamplight. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Amelia said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, Marshall Gentry, I will marry you." He rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all the days to come. They were married on the anniversary of his return to Dry Creek. Amelia wore a dress of pale blue silk ordered specially from San Francisco, and Marshall donned a new black suit. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held in the church that had been built during Amelia's years of solitude. "Do you, Marshall James Gentry, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" asked the preacher. "I do," Marshall answered, his voice firm and clear. "And do you, Amelia Rose Turner, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Amelia looked into the eyes of the man who had kept his promise against all odds, who had brought justice and then love back into her life. "I do," she said. Later, at the celebration held in the town hall, Sheriff Jenkins raised his glass. "To Marshall and Amelia," he toasted. "Proof that even in this wild territory, patience and perseverance can lead to happiness." As the dancing began, Marshall led Amelia onto the floor. "Mrs. Gentry," he said with a smile, "may I have this dance?" "You may have every dance, Mr. Gentry," she replied, returning his smile. "For the rest of our lives." Winter came early that year, bringing snow to the high desert. Amelia and Marshall settled into their life together in her house, which they began to renovate and expand. Marshall continued as deputy sheriff, while Amelia managed the store with newfound enthusiasm. On Christmas Eve, they sat before the fire in their parlor, Marshall's arm around Amelia's shoulders as she leaned against him. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "An early Christmas gift." He handed her a small leather pouch. Amelia opened it carefully, tipping the contents into her palm. A delicate silver ring set with turquoise stones glinted in the firelight. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "The Apache woman who saved me gave it to me before I left her people," Marshall explained. "Said it would lead me to healing. I didn't understand then, but I do now." He took the ring and slipped it onto her right hand. "My healing was finding you again." Amelia kissed him softly. "I have something for you too," she whispered. "But it won't arrive for about 7 months." Marshall's brow furrowed in confusion before understanding dawned in his eyes. "Amelia, are you saying?" She nodded, tears of joy shimmering in her eyes. "We're going to have a baby." Marshall gathered her in his arms, his own eyes damp. "I never thought," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "At my age, after everything. Life has a way of surprising us," Amelia said, resting her head against his chest. 10 years ago, I thought my life was over. Now I realize it was just waiting to begin again. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure." Their daughter, Emily, was born on a sweltering August day in 1879, a strong, healthy child with her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's auburn hair. 2 years later, their son Michael arrived, completing their family. The children grew up hearing the story of how their father had kept his promise, returning after 10 long years to bring justice and love back to their mother's life. Dry Creek continued to grow, eventually becoming a proper town with a railway station, a bank, and even a small hotel. The Gentry General Store prospered under Amelia's management, and Marshall eventually became sheriff when Jenkins retired. On summer evenings, they would sit on their porch watching their children play in the yard, marveling at the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Amelia asked one such evening, as they watched 11-year-old Emily teaching 9-year-old Michael how to lasso a fence post. "Settling down with me after all your years of freedom?" Marshall took her hand, running his thumb over the wedding band that had replaced her mourning clothes as a symbol of her life's journey. "Not for one single moment," he assured her. "Those weren't years of freedom, Amelia. They were years of purpose bringing justice to you. Everything I've done since I was 25 years old has led me to this porch, this home, this family." Amelia leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. Who would have thought that grief could lead to such joy? "Life is a strange trail," Marshall agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair, now streaked liberally with silver. "Full of unexpected turns." As twilight deepened into night, stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky. Emily and Michael came running up to the porch, breathless with their play. "Papa," Emily said, climbing onto Marshall's lap despite being nearly too big for such things. "Tell us again about how you kept your promise to Mama." Marshall's eyes met Amelia's over their daughter's head, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. "Well," he began, his arm tightening around his wife's shoulders, "it all started with a promise I made to the bravest woman I've ever known." Amelia closed her eyes, listening to the familiar story told in her husband's deep voice. She had worn black for 10 long years, waiting for justice that seemed like it would never come. But it had come, along with a love that had transformed her life from one of endless mourning to one of boundless joy. And that, she thought as the desert night enfolded her family in its peaceful embrace, was worth every moment of the wait.